humans are fascinated by apocalyptic tales. We buy into them, we preach them. There have been many instances throughout even modern history where the end of the world has been announced and people will even withdraw to certain places in order to wait out the end. And so far, it has not occurred. As a matter of fact, within the last couple of years, we've had ancient foretellings or interpretation of ancient foretellings, the end of the world. And of course, I refer to the Mayan apocalypse, and that didn't happen. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit later, but also there are Christian denominations who have said the same thing, and there was one recently, and when it didn't happen, then the leader of that denomination said that he had misread the signs, and it was still going to happen, but not when he thought it was. So why are we so fascinated with the thought of the end? Well, I'm not even going to address that from my personal point of view because it's going to be a discussion board for you. I'm merely going to talk about how we are fascinated and how we have been fascinated with this myth for a very long time. And I want to start way back in Egypt. Now, one of the websites that I gave you talks about an Egyptian apocalyptic myth, and it is the one where Ra becomes dissatisfied with humans and sends Hathor to kill them, which is also one of the Egyptian tales of the flood. I do not see this as an apocalyptic myth, so I disagree with that site that calls it that. Most simply put, I cannot see that the Egyptians had a tale of the apocalypse. I cannot see where any of their myths says unequivocally the world is going to end. Now, the Egyptians were fascinated with the afterlife, and it wasn't a morbid fascination. They saw the afterlife as a continuation of this life. And the reason why I do not think that I think that the Egyptians did not have a myth of the end of the world is simply because they could not see their culture ever ending. I think this is why they didn't record their myth in greater depth than they did, because they just did not foresee a time when these myths were not going to be well known. Now, of course, Egyptian society did see that time come, but talking about the ancient Egyptians, I just don't think that they saw it. And so it wasn't a concept of them that it would end. And remember, the Egyptians feared oblivion pretty much more than anything else. It was one of the reasons why they had such an elaborate myth of the afterlife. To them, probably even to live in the afterlife as a slave was better than the thought of oblivion. And I will share my personal opinion here that I think that is the reason for all tales of the afterlife is we fear oblivion. The Sumerians did not really have a concept of the end of the world either that I can see. There are hints of it. For example, when Eresh Kagel is denied the company of Nergal, and she says that if he cannot come and live with her in Ker, that she will release the dead on the earth, which of course is the first recorded promise of the zombie apocalypse. That would have certainly destroyed all of the humans on earth. Now, I'm going to admit that I do not know as much about Sumerian society as I do know about Egyptian society. And perhaps hidden in some of their myths, there is more of, there is a stronger apocalypse, but I just don't, I don't see it. The Greeks, even though they have the different ages of humanity, and I'll say humanity as opposed to man, I don't see that they had really a concept of the end of everything. Their gods were immortal. Now, the Titans, it's up for grabs whether the Titans were really immortal or not, because sometimes you see them living forever and sometimes you don't see them living forever. But the Olympians could not die. Even Persephone, when she descended into the underworld, she didn't die to do that. And she was alive in the underworld. So maybe humans could have been wiped off the face of the earth, but the gods were not. And of course, we could interpret the flood myths as myths of the apocalypse, but not really. They are not really a total end of the world scenario and everything ending by virtue of the fact that in each one of those myths, somebody survives and somebody starts it over. And I want to talk about the Norse. I want to talk about some others, but I want to talk about the Norse before I get to some of the others. The Norse, and this is intimately tied in with the concept of fate. The Norse had the twilight, not the twilight, excuse me. I was going to say that it is often interpreted as the twilight of the gods, but twilight is much too gentle a word for Ragnarok. Ragnarok is the destruction of the gods. And of course, the Norse gods, while being gods, were mortal in the sense that they can die. We see this in Balder. Balder dies and must stay in the underworld, in Helheim or Niflheim. The Norse gods are not omnipotent, omnipresent deities, as is Yahweh in both the Hebrew and the Christian scriptures. And they had a very strong concept of fate, and they had a very strong concept of this end of the world coming. And as I said in the first video, I see the variantness as where a new world arising out of the old world. I see that highly influenced by Christianity. That's how I see it. That's how I interpret these myths. But the Norse did not try to circumvent their fate, and I'm getting into that fate thing, and I didn't want to. I wanted to talk about the apocalypse. But definitely, Ragnarok is an apocalyptic vision where everything ends, even the gods. The Greeks did not see the demise of their deities in the same way, simply because their deities could not die. Within Christianity, there is also the final battle. And let me say that in Norse myth, their final battle is a battle between good and evil. Now, some of us might interpret some of the actions of the Norse gods as kind of hard to tell who is the good and the evil, but it really is not difficult. Odin might have his foibles, but he is not like Loki. And perhaps Loki got a bad rap, but Odin is not like Loki. So it is a definite fight between good and evil, and so is Christianity and the end of the world there. There's a lot of interpretation of the Christian scriptures and as to how this end of the world is going to come about. But at some point, the world will end and a new heaven and a new earth will be established. Now, when it says a new heaven will be established, it doesn't mean a heaven where God lives, but just the firmament of heaven, that there will be a new earth, there'll be a new sky, more or less. I've heard that's the best interpretation that I have heard. So these concepts of apocalypse are very strong in many of the myths that we see. They vary, though, from culture to culture. The Hindus, yeah, the world's going to end, the universe is going to end, but it's going to be recreated. It is cyclical. In some of the ancient societies, they just didn't have a myth of the apocalypse, probably because they didn't see their society ever ending. The Greeks might not have seen their society ending, but when you have immortal deities, well, those deities aren't going to die. And then getting into other parts of the world, which is I'm going to talk about in a minute, and especially in the Mayan myths, within Christianity, that strong concept of fate. It's going to happen. It can't be circumvented, and it will be a battle between good and evil. And the good people are going to be, excuse me, not the good people. The people who are followers of Jesus are going to be resurrected, and those who are not are going to be sent to perdition and are going to suffer. Okay, I'm going to stop there, but of course, as always, I have more to say.